They say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. And if I were to guess just based on the number of words she'd ever written, I'd assume our next guest was some sort of photographer. Pick a local concert that's happened in the past 6 years, and you'd have a better chance of seeing her taking notes, rather than taking pictures. And that's because our next guest used to write for music publications before eventually becoming a UX writer, including an interview with one of my favorite bands growing up, the one and only Simple Plan.
I did get to interview Simple Plan and like 2 members of Simple Plan, and they were so nice. It was like their 10-year reunion tour, and they're all dads now. So I was like sitting down and chatting with a couple of dads.
She would eventually go on to become a UX writer, later trading in the concert tickets for support tickets while helping set the standard for UX copy across a number of different teams. And for those curious, yes, we have some dads here too. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming to the stage the one and only Natalie Dee.
Growing up here, I was like really happy as a kid, but I was also like painfully shy as a kid. And I was like one of those kids where the teacher would say like, "Oh, Natalie's a pleasure to have in class," but she could speak up a little bit more. So kind of being that like really shy kid led me to like reading a lot. I like started reading at a very young age, and all of my relatives loved giving me books. So there was like some like, fantasy series that I got into as like a really little kid, and I wanted to read them myself. So I was just the kind of kid that would like read and read and read. And as I got older, I like still kind of like kept into that reading mentality like throughout all of high school. But when I wasn't reading, I was still like pretty social, even though I was shy. I fortunately had like a good group of friends who let me like tag along to things and things like that. But I think after I say all that, what surprises a lot of people is that I was actually a competitive cheerleader from 4th grade to 12th grade. So it was a lot of tumbling and throwing people around and getting hit in the face with elbows. And so that was like actually a really great experience for me and really helped like build up my confidence. And like, I think it's one of the reasons why I love like working in a team atmosphere so much, because one of the things about cheerleading is that like you have to trust the other people on your team to catch you when you fall. So that's like, I think something that was also had quite an impact on me growing up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just gonna say there's like an interesting kind of duality between like those two sides. I would imagine as a writer, you would probably be somebody who read a lot. And I remember us talking about the cheerleading thing at one of our socials before. So that's like a really interesting part of your life. And I think it really builds personality as well in a way, don't you think?
Exactly. And I think it was an interesting dynamic on the cheerleading team. I was almost like the black sheep of the cheerleading team, even though it was still a very positive experience, but like everyone else was like really into like mainstream pop culture stuff, and I thought I was so cool and different for like liking my indie bands and stuff like that.
And I was gonna ask, I guess, on the other side, obviously as a pretty prolific writer right now, I would have imagined beforehand that you read a lot of books. Yeah. Were there any like books that stuck with you like while you were growing up?
I think honestly, there wasn't one that necessarily inspired me to like start writing, because I actually remember I started writing stories when I was like young. But it's definitely kind of lost a bit of its literally magic now. But like I was really into Harry Potter. I was like Hermione Granger for Halloween like 3 years running. So it's a little bit like bittersweet to look back on it now with all of the really terrible things that J.K. Rowling has been saying. But it's kind of the thing that like first sparked me to read, and then kind of like I just read widely. I read everything I could get my hands on, and also the his Dark Materials series by Philip Pullman was also one of the first series that really gripped me. So like it's like starts with like The Golden Compass, which has had like a bunch of adaptations. And so I never really like read, I'd say, a lot of like what people would call like good literature, or like I don't really believe in like good literature and bad literature, or like good taste and bad taste. It just is. And yeah, so that's definitely like nothing like really ever inspired me to be like, oh, I want to do this. It was more, I was reading all these things and I was like, yeah, I want to be able to tell my own stories. And I did start it writing like full novels in like high school. They're all very bad, but I did write some novels.
I guess, correct me if I'm wrong. So in 2012, you go to the University of British Columbia and you're studying English literature. I don't know if you guys are declaring majors in first year. Is that the case? Did you know that you were going to go in with English literature?
Yeah, it was like after I studied really hard in high school because I was like, I better get into UBC. That was like my goal in high school, to get into UBC. And once I got there, I was 17. I had no idea what to do with my life, but I was always good at reading. So I did like take a little bit of a wide variety of courses in my first year, but I always kind of knew that it was eventually going to be English literature. So it was in my second year of university that I started taking all of like the prereq courses. And like it does for a lot of people, taking English literature in university actually ruined reading for me for several years, because I was having to read all of these things that I didn't want to read and I didn't enjoy reading. And like it was interesting to dive into them and everything, but when you're reading like 6 novels simultaneously, it really takes the joy out of it. And it hasn't been until the last couple years that I've like discovered the joy of reading again.
Mm-hmm. Furthermore, into your university degree, you end up volunteering for the campus radio station. And I remember this because I think we went to university around the same time. So I remember the CITR, which it's like a pop culture outlet, right?
No, that's another one. CITR is a very independent, community-led radio station. It's a co-op radio station, and I was trying to like find like where I belonged in university, and I'd really discovered a passion for music in high school, and so I wanted to like become involved in the music community. And so I just started like the station had volunteers, so I just started hanging out at the station and like discovering all this really cool local like obscure music. And eventually there's a magazine that runs out of CITR called Discorder. It's been in publication for like 40 years, like 30 or 40 years now. And the environment in CITR was just super welcoming. And I was meeting the editors-in-chief. Actually, I think there was one editor-in-chief at the time. I think his name was JC. He invited me. He was like, hey, like you should start doing album reviews for us. Like you write, like, you know, like that'll be a good way for you to like get your start in writing. And like I was still like quite shy actually at this point in university still. So it was really great to have like nurturing, supportive environment. And then kind of this like editor-in-chief eventually like pushed me to like start doing like interviews with artists, which like at first I found absolutely terrifying. But it was like a really great experience to just learn how to like talk to people like about their work, especially people you've never met before. And yeah, so that was just like a really great introduction and kind of gave me somewhere to like develop my like writing skills. And it was really nice to like write these pieces about artists and like what they said, as opposed to like diving into like Macbeth.
Yeah. I think out of the artists that I saw your reviews on, I think there was one on Simple Plan.
Okay, yeah.
That was a different publication.
Yeah, that was a different publication. Okay. So I met the co-editors-in-chief of the Permanent Rain Press at CITR, and they had their own radio show, but they were also starting up their own music blog with a much more like pop culture focus and very much more mainstream than like CITR. CITR would like throw like Battle of the Bands things with like little like tiny Vancouver bands. So it was very, very different. But like one of the main draws to me to the Permanent Rain Press, because at this time I was 19, so I could actually go to concerts in Vancouver. I really, really love concerts. Like concerts are one of my favorite things in the world. And I wanted to go to more concerts. And if you have a press pass to a concert, you go to the concert for free. So that was one of my motivations to start going to concerts. But also, I really also like the idea of like supporting artists. So I ended up going to like at least a couple concerts a month for like from 2015 until 2020. And I also got the chance to do a couple of interviews with them. I didn't do interviews that often because by this point I was like working and had like a full-time job, so that's kind of like makes it difficult to like, because it's a big ask to like prep for an interview, especially with an established artist. There's a lot of research to do, then there's like the stress of like writing the piece itself. But what was nice at the Permanent Rain Press is that I didn't have a word count limit generally, so I could kind of go off the rails a little bit. And yeah, a couple of the bigger interviews I did was I did get to interview Simple Plan and like 2 members of Simple Plan, and they were so nice. It was like their 10-year reunion tour, and they're all dads now. So I was like sitting down and chatting with a couple of dads, and at the end of the interview, they were like, "Oh, so are you coming to the show tonight?" And I was like, "No, actually, like I didn't manage to get tickets." And they were like, "You're coming to the show." Wow. So they were really, really sweet. And I also interviewed Ryan, who's the lead singer of Mother Mother, kind of a big like Vancouver band, and they recently took off on TikTok, which I found so funny, but they've been around for 10 years, and he was also a really interesting guy to talk to.
I was just gonna say, like, I guess when you're at a show, because I've been to a bunch of concerts as well, and I feel like if I was there taking notes and kind of like just, I'm not saying that you were detached, but I guess in a way, does writing notes and like doing reviews for concerts, does it take away the enjoyment of the concert itself?
I think I got better and better at like balancing those two out. But always, like if it was an artist I really, really loved, I would just buy a ticket and go to their show. But I remember I started my very first show. I was reviewing Yukon Blonde, also at the Commodore. I had like a little paper notebook with me. I was like the biggest nerd, and I think it was even at the second show, I started doing like the notes app on my phone because it was much more subtle. And I really tried my best. It was more like if they said something really cool, if there was like a specific moment that I really wanted to remember, that's what I would write down. And then as the time wore on, I realized that like taking short video clips also really, really helped me like remember the concert. Cause yeah, I like hated to be that person like looking down at my phone and stuff. And because this was such a small outlet, we didn't always have photographers to come cover the shows. So sometimes it was literally my iPhone photos of these shows. So often I was like pretty close to the artist. So I did not want to be that person looking down at their phone while the artist was performing, because I think that's like really disrespectful. So I also got really good at typing while looking at the artist and not looking at my phone.
And that's hard to do with like a mobile phone when you can't even feel the keys, right?
Yeah, so sometimes my notes didn't make any sense. But yeah, I really tried to like be like respectful to the artist as much as possible, so you didn't just see this girl at her phone. We were always there through official channels, so like they knew their show was being reviewed, but I didn't want them to know that like it was me reviewing their show.
It's almost like if you go into a restaurant and they knew you were like a Michelin guide reviewer, and it's like, oh, they're gonna just start treating you differently. Exactly. So backtracking a little bit, I guess. So we're in 2017. You just graduated university, right? And I guess afterwards, you find yourself back at university in 2019. This time going to Emily Carr and studying interaction design. I guess between 2017 and 2019, what series of events eventually led you back to university?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so to get there, you need to go back a little bit further. So in 2015, I went and I lived in the Netherlands for 6 months on exchange. And after that, I was like, wow, I need to go live in other countries and explore the world. But like, I need money to do that. And one of my close friends who I made in the Netherlands, she was an English teacher. So she was like, you should just go like get your English teaching certification and travel the world and teach English. And I was like, sounds great. So as soon as I got back from Europe in 2015, I got my CELTA certification to teach English. And so I kind of had that in my back pocket as I was finishing my bachelor's degree. And because for most places in Vancouver, you need a bachelor's degree in order to kind of teach English at one of the many language schools here. And then that actually led to me getting a summer student job at UBC, where I was like a tour guide for ESL students. And so that was like a really, really fun job where I like just got to know these students on like a really like personal level and like hang out with them and like be their friend almost. So that was like a really great experience as I was like finishing up my studies. And then the summer after I graduated, I got a job at a summer camp teaching English for about 6 weeks. And after those 6 weeks, I realized that teaching English was not for me. So that kind of led to, I was like a little bit lost for a while, but I was able to get a supervisor position at my English teaching job at the place where I was an English language school tour guide. And so I was a supervisor there for like almost a year. And it really gave me like the basic like office skills and problem solving skills that like you kind of need in any job. So I'm super grateful for that. But after a while, I knew it was time to move on. And so I ended up doing admin work at Langara College and events. And that was like it was a really great place to find my footing. It was a full-time job. I really loved my supervisor. But after a while there, it was a good team. It was sometimes interesting work, but I was like, my brain is bored. I can't do this for the rest of my life. And so I was like, okay, what do I want to do? And when I was a teenager, I was on Tumblr a lot, and I kind of taught myself HTML and CSS to make my Tumblr blog look good. And so I was actually initially interested in coding and learning how to build websites, which is what actually initially drove me to this program at Emily Carr when I was just like Googling, like I wanted to go back to school. So I was like, what can I do? So this program at Emily Carr was actually like, I'd say like 50% like front end coding and then like 50% UX. And so like I like read a little bit more into UX. I was thinking about applying for this program, and I was like, okay, you know what? Like it's 6 months, like let's give it a try. And then so that's kind of like, it was like I needed something to like challenge me more, so where I could be more creative. And then kind of I was looking into UX and looking into like front end design. I was like, yeah, like that sounds like what would be good. And yeah, and then it was literally, I decided like 2 months before I started my program at Emily Carr. I was like, yes, let's go, let's do this.
And I guess there, when you were studying interaction design and doing UI UX, I guess naturally you kind of just went down the path of looking at where the writing was and all of that.
Yeah, I'd say I have to give a lot of credit to like my teachers at Emily Carr, who like were like, especially, yeah, they were like, you would be really good as a UX writer, because what was really cool about the program at Emily Carr is that all of us like had already finished school, so we all came from these really diverse backgrounds, and the teachers were so good at being like, this is a niche you would fit well into, this is a niche you would fit well into. So immediately they were like, Natalie, you would like fit really well into UX writing. And I had the flexibility and the freedom to focus my studies on like, and my coursework on UX writing a little bit more. And so yeah, it was through that process that like I really learned a lot about UX. I did like quite a bit of front end development, and like, you know, learned how to build a website, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, and just like got really good support from my teachers and have some really good mentors there. And like, yeah, it was like a really good experience overall.
I remember when I was doing UI UX for the first time. So I did a lot of projects back in university as well. And I used to just do the writing. And in a way, I can now see and appreciate the roles that UX writers have, because it's completely different from like marketing copy, I find. What do you ultimately define as the main difference between the two?
I always like to describe UX writing as designing with words. And I feel like it's like a puzzle you have to solve to find like the right word for the exact right space. And I think there's so many different elements and like components that you have to keep in mind when choosing like maybe 5 words in UX writing. So there's a lot of stuff you have to like keep in your head all at once, and it's at a very like micro level. Like there's a reason why it's called micro copy. But with copywriting, that I actually haven't done much copywriting myself, it's a very marketing focused thing. Like you want to sell somebody something, you want to tell somebody a story. You're like really keeping the interests of the business at the heart of like what you do. And I think there's like a lot more like room for like creativity in a sense. I think like UX writing is creative in a different way, whereas UX writing, you're always on the side of the user, and you really want to make sure like the user has like the best experience possible, and you want to like just focus on like making their lives easier. And there's also just so many more dependencies. Like you need to know like, oh, can we make this text dynamic? Oh, are we able to Yep, lost the train of thought. But yeah, it's like, can we make this text dynamic? Like, oh, are we able to pull this information from this database? And so it's so much more collaborative as well, which is what I really like. Like, I talk to product managers, QA devs, like, of course, UX designers all the time.
And I was just gonna say, I think as well, when you have to work with constraints like modal sizes and like button space, it's just I can see where there's a line of art down that road, because you have to like really kind of just pick your words, so to speak. Cool. So UX writing, obviously, like I recently had like a really good appreciation of it, but you actually became a UX writer for the first time with your official role back in 2020, where you landed a position. So this is a year out of university. You landed a position at Rise People as a UX writer. What do you remember about the time leading up to that first job?
Yeah, well, so I graduated in October 2019, and I actually, I had just finished school. My bank account was looking a little sad, and I was like, and because UX writer positions, there aren't a lot of them. I knew it was probably going to be a while before the right position for me came up. So actually, I had a really good experience at Langara College, and they invited me to come back into one of my previous roles, and for a 3-month contract. And I was like, oh, that's perfect. Like, gives me 3 months to develop my portfolio, and then I'll go on the job hunt. So that 3-month contract ended in March 2020, and I had actually just declined a contract extension around the weekend that the world kind of really started to shut down. So I actually went back to work on that Monday, and I was like, so that contract extension I turned down. And fortunately, the people at Langara, like, it was such a great team, and I'd always been very transparent with them, being like, as much as I enjoy working here, but UX writing is what I want to do, and they'd always been very receptive to that. But when I said, I was like, hey, the world is a really scary place right now. Like, I would love to stay. I was able to keep that job, and I feel so lucky that I was able to have stable employment throughout the pandemic, and like I wasn't let go, and I was able to keep my job even though my job was in events at Langara. So it was very interesting putting together a convocation in June 2020. So I was just able to keep that job at Langara, and I just kept an eye out for UX writer job listings, and then it was in like September that this one came around, and I was lucky enough to get it.
Just kind of looking at your track record and your experience, I guess leading up to a UX writing role, how much of the stuff that you did beforehand was transferable?
Yeah, a lot. Sometimes I feel like, have I just like twisted this all in my head in like job interviews to make it all relevant? But I think especially all of the work that I did in ESL really gave me an appreciation for how easily words can be misconstrued, and how important it is to be clear when communicating things, and like just the way that there can be like so many misinterpretations so easily. So that really taught me a lot about communicating clearly. Especially in my work at Langara, I was doing a lot of like student communications and stuff like that. And so just making sure everything was as clear as possible. That was like a really great experience for me to like apply all of the ESL teaching I'd done. And then also just like having done a lot of writing, even though it was long form writing, I knew how to write. But yeah, so I was able to like twist a lot of my experiences in terms of like ESL and making sure things were clear, as well as all of my writing experience as well, to all of these communications to students at Langara. And so that's kind of the way I was able to always keep a focus on the meaning of the words, and like, is this clear? Is this helpful?
Mm-hmm. When I looked through your portfolio, a lot of the stuff and the rationalization that you made, it made a lot of sense, honestly. I think when you start breaking down all of those parts into kind of just what's the user motivation, what's the outcome of these things that you've written, I think it makes sense when you frame it in that way. And then maybe it doesn't really make sense when you kind of just take it at point blank. So I'm glad that a lot of those things were able to transfer over. I guess moving on to the topic about accessibility, just because this is a topic that I find exists in like just the broad scope of design and writing. So in February 2021, you were able to work on a really interesting project on the side where you work with the government. It was a government funded project through an organization at UBC, and they created an app for bipolar disorder, right?
Yes. It's a project that's still ongoing, so I'm actually like neck deep in the copy for that project right now. But yeah, I have to say it's like I'm so excited about this project. I actually joined. I was like it was in 2020 actually when I first joined on the project on like an advisory board. They were just looking for folks to give input on this project, and because I was looking for UX experience, I had someone who was previously involved in the organization, and they're like, "Hey, this organization is looking for UX people." And I was like, "Oh, perfect." And then so it kind of came as things like we've literally built this app from scratch. And the aim of this app is to improve the quality of life of people with bipolar. And so what they've done is there's been years and years of research on this quality of life scale, and they're translating this quality of life scale into app form. And so it just so happened that the deeper they got into this project, I was like, hey, like you guys have a lot of content here, because another section of the app is educational content. So educating folks with bipolar disorder about like the different aspects of their life that is impacted by bipolar, and what they can do to help improve the quality of those segments of their life. And so, because there's so much information in this app, and there's a lot of academics, brilliant people working on this app, but sometimes academics, if you've been in university, you know that they are sometimes not the best at writing the most accessible language. So, first, after doing all of the UX writing for the app, which was super exciting because it's the first time I was able to do UX writing from scratch instead of having to deal with someone else's writing that maybe wasn't the best. I was able to create a tone of voice guide for them, which was like supportive and compassionate, and like really like the tone of this app was so important, because we know that people who are using this app might be in very different mood states. They might be in a very elevated mood, or they might be very depressed. So we needed to find a balance of a tone of voice that would accommodate all of these different mood states. And then so right now there's a ton of like written informational content about the app.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's probably one of the more challenging writing assignments, just because of the amount of consideration. So it must have been just like a lot of A/B testing, I guess.
Yeah, not I'd say less A/B testing, but yeah, I realized one of the best parts of this research group is that they're a collaborative research group, which means there are many people who have lived experience with bipolar disorder who work for this organization. So we are able to get people with lived experience with bipolar disorder, like multiple people, to look through everything that we're doing to be like, does this resonate with you? Is this good for you? So it's been like we essentially just have like a group of users who are there to constantly be giving us feedback, which is like one of the most incredible experiences ever. And I'm so grateful for those people to be like dedicating their time and like efforts to like help us build this thing.
So it seems like you have a lot of this lived experience, at least in the UX writing world as well as the academic world. And most recently, so in June 2021, you end up finding yourself at Later, where you are currently a UX writer. Just wanted to ask you, in the past 7 months, how has everything been for you?
It's been so incredible. Like, I get like this every single time I talk about Later. Like, the team at Later is so amazing. And like, we have such a great team of designers. We have such a great team of researchers. And I've learned so much about like UX processes. And one of the reasons why wanted to join Later is because I wanted to learn from other UX writers. So we have another amazing lead UX writer on our team, and I have learned so much from her. And just the ability to be in an organization that like has a great product but like also has the most amazing team of people to work with, it's been like an incredible experience so far.
And I know that diversity and inclusivity is a big part of your identity as well. You mentioned to me this before, but as a bi woman in tech, obviously there's a lot of adversity and challenges that I feel like are being addressed right now. And obviously, I think some companies are doing better jobs of it. How do you think Later has been doing in supporting you in that?
Yeah. I think like one of the first things about Later that I really appreciated is within the first like week of being at Later, I was like, oh, there's like other like gay people here. And I was like, oh, this is great. Like there's like just having that sense of community and like the not being the only person in the room kind of thing like really helped. And I think also one thing that Later has just done is that they've hired the right people. Like I am so privileged to like work in a space where I can be out and open and not be in fear of like retaliation or discrimination. And kind of so right now actually we're doing some exciting things about like diversity and inclusivity, and they are kind of giving us like the time and the resources to figure out like how can we better, like we've reached this bar where everyone at Later is inclusive, we feel supported, but like how can we kind of go the next few steps of like doing some things that are like a little bit more actionable, a little bit more tangible now that we've reached this place free of discrimination. And so I really appreciate that it's like an effort led by members of the LGBTQ community at Later instead of like a top-down thing, and we're just being given like the support and the resources and the time to being like, yes, you take as much time as you need, like let us know what we can do to like help build like a better supported LGBTQ community at Later.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel like the company does a really good job at empowering people. Yeah. And yeah, no, I totally agree with all of the points you made. So one thing that I find that is consistent across the board between design and writing is that people's attention spans these days are pretty low. And I think it's probably due to a lot of the access to mobile apps, the internet being widespread. And like I said, this is a problem that both writers and designers face every day when it comes to designing and writing for products. So how would you approach writing with the assumption that people just don't read? And is that even a valid assumption to begin with?
I think to an extent it is. I'd say more assuming people don't read everything. I believe it was originally the Nielsen Norman group, like figured out that people read in like an F pattern. So like usually you get like the first couple lines of text that they'll read, and then they just maybe start reading like the first couple words of everything. So it's about front loading things and putting the most important things into headlines, and maybe, putting something in bold to like catch their eye, or even instead of saying like putting the action before the consequence, put the consequence before the action. So for example, to delete your account, enter this word, as opposed to enter this word to delete your account, because if they just read the first part, then they might not know what they're doing. And I think the other part of that is assume people will start reading when they run into a problem. So, if the UX is good, which a lot of the time it is, then the user will just be able to go through no problem. But it's when they encounter a problem that they want to stop and read and being like, what's going on? So it's also making sure content is there when they can possibly run into a problem.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, because I was just going to say, I think it's definitely one of those things that has a lot of considerations between both sides. And I guess when you're measuring the impact that writing has over the actual functionality of the app, how do you, as a writer, how do you measure the performance of what you're writing?
This is a really hard question, and like if someone has an answer, please DM me on LinkedIn, because it is like really, I think it's to an extent also the same with UX. It's, unless it's like A/B testing, it's really hard to like quantify in a certain way. It's one of the reasons why I love working with UX researchers, because I get, when you're looking in on a research session and someone like makes a comment on the copy, that is like so either validating or being like, oh, okay, this is something we need to fix. Great. And it's really, really hard. And it's kind of like, if copy confuses people, then it's bad, but you don't know if copy confuses people unless you get told. And it's really hard, and I don't really have an answer, to be honest with you. It's kind of like you see like overall apps that have UX writers is an overall better user experience, but it's very hard to pinpoint exactly why.
Okay. Yeah, and I think the only possible scenario that I can see is that if you literally like write down every different test case and you do like an A/B test across like 16 different cases, right? And obviously as the test grows bigger, a lot of the accuracy kind of goes down because the numbers just for each of those cases kind of don't add up the same way that if you were just testing two solutions. So yeah, I mean that's a fair read over that.
I mean, also keep in mind, I am a year and a half into this game, so I'm sure there are many other people who would have much better, more eloquent answers than I ever would.
Have to get Jenny on the show.
Yeah, exactly. Jenny would know. Jenny would know.
Yeah. So another thing that I wanted to talk to you about specifically was the idea of globalization and internationalization. So one thing that I noticed, so Later does these annual retreats every year, and last year as a company we got to go to Montreal, and this was so vivid to me because I remember just sitting across from you during breakfast. We were on a table with a bunch of other people, and just how quickly you were able to switch between French and English to me just shocked me because I am, I'm Indonesian, but I'm not proficient in Indonesian at all. So it's hard for me to kind of grasp how somebody just quickly does that. I guess with that in mind and kind of just this growing trend towards globalization, how do you approach writing when maybe the words don't translate the same in another language, or maybe just even the way that it's read is like in the other side?
Yeah, I guess you also like make my French abilities sound much better than they actually are. They are not very good. But I know my P's and Q's, so I know my pleases and my thank yous and like asking for things. But yeah, actually I always consider, like, I sometimes think about, I was like, if this was in French, could I understand it? Because my level in French is kind of at a point where I know, like, there's these kind of language levels that are used universally, which is A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2. And so, like, C2 is like native speaker, like very proficient, where it's like A1, you maybe know how to say your name and like please and thank you. When my French was at its peak, I was a B2. And so I kind of use that to like keep in mind that I'm like, okay, like if this was in French, like would I be able to understand it? As well as my experience being like an ESL teacher, looking out for like words that like are like homonyms that have double meanings and things like that. So that really helps me like take into consideration being like, if this is like a non-native speaker, like would they be able to understand this? But in terms of like making things available for translation, I find just avoiding idioms and avoiding like any really complex language is kind of the most we can do. Definitely big shout out to the translators. They are the ones who really do the heavy lifting. But yeah, I think it also ties into like what UX writing is, trying to like keep things as simple as possible. I do hope usually helps it translate well, because I think it's probably marketing writing is much harder to translate.
Yeah, and I would imagine that if we're gonna kind of go down this trend of translating all of the apps and all of the products out there, we probably have to go in with more of a copy-led design thinking in that sense. So kind of having that flexibility to kind of change up formats and stuff like that would be really important.
Yeah, and I just realized also one thing that's really important, what to keep in mind translation, especially if you're translating from English to languages like Spanish or French. I learned this when I was working for an app that everything was in English and French. It was a Canadian app. French is about 20 to 40% longer than English. So sometimes you had to be really careful with the English. Otherwise, when it got translated to French, it would break the design. So sometimes you could get away with it, but it also is like another thing. Like you got to be concise so when things are going to be translated, because things take up like a different amount of room.
I'm just glad that we don't have to type out all the numbers with words, because like I could just imagine, because I know the French number system, and it's just like, yeah, it's quite long. So yeah, the next question that I wanted to ask you is around the idea of the golden rules of UX writing. What would you say are, in your opinion, given your experience, what do you say are some of the golden rules of UX writing?
Okay, you know what? I can do it in 5 words. in the spirit of UX writing, and I stole these. I watched a talk of Google UX writers on YouTube, and they just put it so well that I just steal it from them. I don't want to take any credit for this, but pretty much UX writing is clear, concise, useful, and on brand. Preferably in that, actually, I'd say like useful is most important, because I think part of UX writing is knowing when words don't need to be there. So sometimes you don't need that heading, or you don't need that subcopy. Like, you can just cut it out. So that's keeping things concise, and they also need to be clear, because if your wording isn't clear, then it's just going to make the user experience worse. And then just concise also ties into both of those. You just want to keep things as short as possible all the time. And then on brand, I think it's sometimes the trickiest part, and sometimes you have to sacrifice on brand a little bit for like the other three elements. But when you're using an app, it can be so jarring if like something is in a completely different tone. So like one of the biggest challenges of like starting a new UX writing position is figuring out the tone. And it's like, do you use first person or second person? Are you like really cheery, like, and exciting and like excited when you're talking to your users? Or like, do you keep things like a little bit more calm? Because like some companies have like really, really like kind of like in your face UX writing almost, and are like very cheeky and have a lot of personality. And then other tones are like really, really serious, and there's nothing that can like shock you out of an experience of like a piece of writing like sounding completely different than like tone wise than like all of the other pieces of writing you've just been exposed to, like doing a flow.
Mm-hmm. I get that. Okay. And I guess more for our junior audience, or kind of people trying to get into the UX writing space, what would you say, as somebody who originally didn't come from like a traditional UX writing background? I'm also not sure if we have like UX writing courses.
They have just started to like be offered. I think like UBC had extended learning. Are they continuing studies now? I think they're continuing studies. Okay. So UBC continuing studies does have a UX writing course, as well as there's several kind of UX writing like collectives or hubs online that are also starting to offer courses as well.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess for our more junior audience, for those who are looking to go into the UX writing space, what would you say are some of the key things that they can do right now to get themselves started?
I would say start paying attention to the writing in apps, because the one thing about good writing is it just blends into the app. And I think especially pay attention to error messages, kind of, because error messages I'd say are like one of the hardest parts of UX writing and the easiest things to get wrong. So it's, so once you start paying attention to like all of the error messages you get, you can kind of start to get a sense of like what's good and like what's bad. And then like, you got to keep in mind like companies, like Apple and Google have like really good UX writing. So make sure to like pay attention, like when you're using your phone or when you're using Google, to like figure out like how they're communicating with you. I think that's really, really important. And then as well as like what's always like a good challenge is to like, what I also love about UX writing is that it's so like low barrier. So you can just like go in and start like rewriting an app. Or like, you just need wireframes to start like rewriting things. So I think that's also a good thing to just like, it's so easy to like sit down. It doesn't have to be a major project. And you could just be like, I want to write an error message for a wrong password in this tone. And I know there's like lots of daily challenges and exercises you can do. But I think also if you're like really trying to break into the job industry, if you're really trying to break into the industry, it's kind of important. Like UX writing is becoming more and more common, but there still aren't a lot of openings. So sometimes you just have to be patient and wait for the right opportunity and the right opening, especially if you're like in a smaller market like Vancouver. Like there are not new postings for UX writers opening every day.
Yeah. I like to say to myself that luck favors those who are prepared. So definitely get your portfolio ready for the market.
Yes, definitely portfolios are important, but yeah, I'd say like UX writing portfolios are hard to come by, because especially if you don't have the design skills, it is definitely a little bit hard, and I wish I had a little bit more advice. However, because I came like fresh out of school, I like had my own UX projects that I was able to put my own words into and really showcase my skills that way.
Yeah, so maybe take a more like collaborative effort where you can like, if you're not going to be paying attention too much to the UX, you might as well write your case studies based on the copy.
Yeah, or like if you could find like, I know there are some UX designers who really don't like doing copy. If you could find someone to collaborate with, being like, hey, you need something for your portfolio, I need something for my portfolio. Like, let's like make each other look good in this way.
Yeah. And I guess that also plays into building up your collaboration skills, as it's like super important these days as well.
So I think one of the most important things about being a UX writer is actually being humble and understanding that you are not the person, like you do not know best 100% of the time. Like you cannot guess how other people will interpret words. And what I really like about the current process at Later is that so many people end up looking at my copy, and everyone like gives me really good feedback. If someone thinks something isn't right, they tell me, and a lot of the time like they have a really valid point, and sometimes they'll even suggest copy that was way better than what I suggested. So I think like being a UX writer, you really have to like check your ego sometimes, and being like, I don't know everything about writing, and that like there's definitely such a thing as too many cooks in the kitchen, but as a UX writer, you really need to take into account the opinions of other people for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. So I guess looking forward for the rest of the year, what are you looking most forward to?
Personally or professionally?
Well, let's start with personally.
I still have not been to a concert since February 2020. So I have just had some more concerts canceled, but I'm really hoping that I have some very exciting concerts lined up for April. So I'm very much hoping that I get to return to concerts in April and see some of my favorite artists.
And what are you looking forward to in a professional way?
Okay, so there's two really big things, like professionally, that I'm looking forward to. So I think I neglected to mention names, but so working with the CREST lab at UBC on the app to help improve the quality of life of people with bipolar disorder. The app's name is Polaris, and we are hoping to release a beta version of the app to go along with a formal academic research study later on this year, probably like midway through the year. And so I am so excited to finally get the app in the hands of our users, and like for it to like start helping them, and for us to also figure out like where we can go from there to like make the app even better. Yeah, and then we also have so many exciting things like coming up at Later this year, both product wise and team wise. We are like getting some new members of our UX team at Later, and they're a little bit more junior, and I am so excited to collaborate with them and find out about their working styles. And I know sometimes they've never experienced working with a UX writer before, and they've told me like how excited they are to like work with like a UX writer. So I'm so excited to like teach them a little bit about UX writing and just like see where our team goes from there.
Cool. Well, this has been a great podcast, and yeah, thanks
so much for having me.
Of course.
So wonderful.
Anytime. Hey, this is Joey, and thanks for listening in to this week's episode of the Minimum Viable Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, give us a follow. We have new ones coming out every week that I think you'll enjoy just as much. And in the meantime, share it around with your network, leave a comment, or send me questions at Joey Limmena. I'd be more than happy to talk about this episode and any future ones we have planned out.